To welcome Ellen Mueller. So she's the author of this fantastic book. It's sort of a red and yellow one. Look at that. It's a red and yellow one. I actually have a hardcover copy. Apparently, oh, there we go. There's one over there as well. That's good. Okay, so just in case you've missed it, it's called Walking as Artistic Practice. Ellen's going to do a little presentation about it. First of all, I'm just going to introduce Ellen. I'm going to choose one of her bio paragraphs. You'll find there's a link in the chat which links to her full bio. But Ellen is Director of Programs at Arts Midwest. Previously, she's been a member of the faculty at Minneapolis College of Art and Design, UMass Dartmouth, West Virginia, Wesleyan College, and Colorado State University in Pueblo. She received her MFA in Studio Art from University of South Florida and completed a BA in Theatre and Art and a BS in Design Technology. BS, we don't use that in the UK. That means something completely different. Anyway, and a BS in Design Technology from Birmingham. Is that how you pronounce it? Is it Birmingham? Birmingham State University. No idea. Where on earth is that?
That it's in northern Minnesota, and it's an Ojibwe word. Yeah.
Wow, I love it. So over to you, Ellen. Take us away.
Thank you so much for that intro, Andrew, and thank you all so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen. It'll take me just a second. And, oops, wrong one. Stop sharing. Okay, hold on. Let's see here. There we go. All right, so now I think you can see my slides. Yeah? Excellent. All right, so I thought today it might be fun to talk about how this book came to be, because it covers a lot of ground. It's a really wide-ranging approach to walking as artistic practice. And I often get the question, how did this come to be? So I'm going to talk for about between 5 to 10 minutes about that history and what led to this book. And by doing that, I'm going to cover all 10 of the chapters. So if something resonates with you, if there's a subtopic that really interests you, feel free to jot it down or interrupt me, because that could lead to some really fun conversation afterwards. So my name's Ellen Mueller, she, her pronouns. I'm located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That is Dakota and Anishinaabe land. And I'm here to talk about walking as artistic practice. As Andrew said, the hardcover is out right now, and the soft cover comes out in April. I've been telling folks you probably want to wait for that one. The hardcovers are priced at a rate that are great for libraries and not so much for individuals. So if you're interested, I've got that link right here. And with that, I'm going to dive in. So I first encountered the concept of walking as artistic practice in about 2009 while I was in graduate school. And I was doing a seminar with Rosalinda Borchila at University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida. And in fact, the work that is pictured here is called Walk to the Beach, and it is included in the book. And this is a wonderful piece about how incredibly difficult it is to walk anywhere in some of the suburban sprawl that you encounter all across the United States. So I'm going to have some pictures embedded throughout the presentation that showcase different works that are in the book, or pictures from classes that I've taught or workshops that I've taught. So after that 2009 seminar, I started to incorporate walking as artistic practice into my own studio practice. And this is a shot of one of the works that I did. It was called Three-Mouth Light Arrays to Counter Frightful Darkness. And I used walking at night and lights in performers' mouths to emphasize some safety issues that I encountered as a woman walking at night in Tampa, Florida, and issues of the dark and what it is to walk as an individual versus as a group. This was from 2009 itself. Another example of a walking work from my own practice is called What We Share. This was later in 2016, and I created this with a lot of window artworks that emphasize shared community goods and invited the community to walk through our shared landscape together and think about what we share, with the emphasis on commonality, given that this was 2016. For those of you in the States, this was the summer of Trump's election. So this was it made public space a very fraught space, and walking felt like a really great medium to get out there and have conversations with people. And then it invited engagement online as well. People were taking photos, using hashtags, and connecting with each other in both spaces. And there have been other walking works in my personal practice since then, but I've always been keeping an eye out for ways to further engage the topic, to explore more deeply, and indulge in this area of study. So in 2019, when I encountered an open call for class proposals at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design Continuing Ed department, I knew it. I was like, oh, this is it. This is the opportunity I've been looking for to propose a kind of offbeat class. As Andrew said, this weird thing that we call walking as artistic practice. And thankfully, they were game. They were willing to give it a shot. And their guideline was, if you could get at least 5 people to sign up, your class would go. And so I threw my hat in the ring, and thankfully it was very, very popular. It was wonderful. We had nice big classes for all 3 summers that I taught this workshop. So the contents of these walking workshops, and here is an image of the year 1 that I did it. The contents of the workshops became the content of this book, with a lot of, add-ons and updates and things like that. So I'm going to walk you through those summer workshops and show you how that connects to the 10 chapters of the book. So in 2019, it was taught in person. That's what that first shot was. Here I've got a shot of the online course environment, because sure enough, in summer 2020 and 2021, the first 2 summers of the pandemic, we were online. But that opened up a lot of opportunity because we had participants from across the world, which was very cool and very exciting. So each time I taught it, it was 3 weeks long, and we did a different topic each week. We met once a week for 3 hours. And so what did we cover? Well, there were so many entry points and so many possibilities that history felt like a really good place to start. And author and artist Francesco Carreri traces early predecessors of walking really well. So I often recommend this book to people. He takes it all the way back to the Paleolithic era or period. And that is a really fun place to start with folks who are new to the field, as well as those who've been doing it forever. So in each workshop, we started by discussing a little bit of the history from that Paleolithic times all the way through the current moment. We looked at walking both inside art worlds and outside of art worlds. And in these workshops, I went through things like early records of walking, thinkers in walking, walking in activism, art movements, contemporary practices, collectives, and so on. And this went on to become chapter 1 in the book. We also talked about how to analyze works. So we talked about history in all 3 workshops, and we talked about analyzing work in all 3 workshops, just so we'd have a common vocabulary and we'd be able to talk to each other effectively about what we were learning and what we were making, because we were doing both. We had folks go out and make their own walking works and then come back and chat about them. And this became chapter 2, because I would say this is probably the second most common question I get about walking as artistic practice is, oh, how do you do that? Like, how do you bring that into a formal art space? And all of these different modes, maps, photographs, videos, et cetera, these are all ways that are often used to showcase that walking work. And then participants in these workshops, I usually started with some sort of introductory observational exercise that engaged the 5 most recognizable senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, and hearing. Or did I get them all? Yeah, I think so. And I built on this idea to create chapter 3 because this is such a great entry point that for people to get into. It heightens listening, it heightens observation, And in the book for chapter 3, I added a couple more subtopics here that seem to complement observation in the senses, which were personal experience, the everyday, and chance. So that's sort of the contents of chapter 3. And then leading and following was a really popular topic that I did during the first workshop in 2019. And that became chapter 4 in the book. And we covered things like group dynamics and writing, how to write a score or how to write a set of directions for walking. And I built on that topic that we did in class by adding topics such as consent, tourism, participation, and archives. So this is a really wide-ranging chapter in the book. And as you can see here, this is not from the 3 summer workshops, but I've also been doing walking workshops with classes. And this one was from fall 2017. All right, so chapter 5 was a topic that I covered in all 3 years because it's a really important one. Who gets to walk and where? And this was important not only because of the unique identities of every single student who participated, but also because in years 2 and 3, we were distributed. So we had people walking in cities everywhere across the United States, overseas, and this was important that people think before they walk and think about safety and where they felt okay to walk. So in the class, we focused a lot on issues of race, gender, and disability. And for the book, I added on to that, and I connected it to ideas of surveillance, as well as Indigenous perspectives and citizenship and legal status as additional points of view. Because in the book, we're able to go a little bit further, a little broader than in those little 3-hour class sessions. So that ended up being chapter 5. And in 2020, so this would be year 2 of the workshops, one of our weekly topics was rituals, which felt really fitting at that time. This was the first summer of the pandemic, and a lot of folks were developing their walking practice for the first time. So we focused on things like daily walks, walking with animals, gardens, contemplation, and that was what we covered in the workshop. And then for the book, I added onto that a whole bunch of other ritual-related walking practices, from commuting to labyrinth, community and initiation, parades and processions, which is one of my favorite subtopics, as well as pilgrimages, quests, wandering, and journeying. So as you can see, another really expansive umbrella topic, chapter 6, rituals. And then in 2021, the 3rd year of the workshop, we had a focus on the idea of place as it relates to walking. This is one of the pieces that's featured in the book, Zig Jackson entering Zig's Indian Reservation from 1997. We were focusing on representation, identity, and protest as those relate to place. And then outside of the workshop, I built on those topics for this chapter and added subsections on Indigenous perspectives, urban versus rural experiences, concepts of home and localness, as well as getting lost. So that's chapter 7, place. And I should say we didn't have a full week dedicated to activism in the 3 workshops, but it did pop up in conversation a lot. And so it felt fitting to add a chapter to the book once I was writing that was specifically about activism. So that's chapter 8. And it walks through protests, demonstrations, sites and monuments, humor and education, and all of those with the focus of activism. So that's our chapter 8. And then in 2019, we had a week focused on connections to drawing, and this was very, very popular. This was where we in class, we tried to trace a collaborative drawing in the grass using our steps. So this isn't from 2019, it's from 2017, but this is a really fun exercise to engage in with a group of people. People get a little bit concerned about, are we ruining the grass? Don't worry, the grass will wear back. But it's a really lovely ephemeral and durational type of artwork, in that we we pick a line or we pick a path to carve together with our feet and our steps, and we do it together. And individually, I also invited folks to create some GPS drawings by walking through the city. And that's what we did in the walking class. And then to build up a full chapter, chapter 9, I added links to performance, dance, and choreography, and built up the sections on land art lineages, technology, and mapping, and the idea of leaving a trace or tracing something as we walk. And that becomes chapter 9. And I love this chapter personally, just because I as an interdisciplinary artist, I have worked with drawing for a really long time. So that's where this one came from. And then the last chapter, chapter 10, we had a week on embodiment in 2021. That was the third year of the workshop. And we focused on technology, disability, and sensory experience. And that was a wonderful experience in that tight 3-hour meeting, but it definitely needed to broaden and expand for the book. So I added connections such as health benefits, meditative qualities of walking, thinking and perspective taking, as well as falling, which I find to be a lot of fun. And actually, there's quite a bit of work in that area. And the piece that's pictured here is Martin Kurzel's tripping photos from 1995, and that is in the book itself. So those are the 10 chapters. And then I just have a lot of resources as a teacher. I pick up a lot of wonderful concrete tips and tricks and things, and I added those into an appendix. So in the appendix, this is beyond the 75 exercises in the book, beyond the 300 examples that are mentioned. We've got sections on how to document work, some tips and tricks and resources. If you are looking to do your own workshop or teach a class, there's a couple sample syllabi in the back. There's a reading list of recommended readings. There's ideation tips, like how to generate new work. A wonderful section on community engagement, and also for travel-based study or touring with walking and as your focus, there's some tips in there as well. So that's it. That's my short little presentation. So I'm going to hit stop here and invite any questions or comments or areas that excite people. I welcome it all.
Yeah, is anyone going to kick us off, or are you all relying on me to come up with something? I mean, the first thing you do when you get a book like this, you look straight in it to find out whether you get a mention. Okay? The bad news is I personally don't get a mention. I'm going to take this woman to court. Anyway, Simon, you got your hand up. Give us a question. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks. That was super interesting and actually relevant for something I've got coming up. So I will be lecturing your book. So I want to ask you about the idea.
Well, Simon, we're losing you and very poor internet connection. Can you type your question or?
Oh, hang on. Let me just move my phone. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Oh, right. Yeah. So sorry. Yes. Super interesting. Thank you. Very useful. I will be purchasing a copy of your book for a workshop I'm going to do next year. Speaking of which, I'm very interested in situationism and the idea of the beach beneath the street. And I wanted to know what you think of. So this is my take on it, is that it starts off as a Marxist critique of false consciousness that we live in the consumerist capitalist system, and then it overlaps with the almost more spiritual idea that we're exposed to all sorts of influences around us, and a lot of them are not actually very good for us. And if we can sift out the bad conditioning and somehow be more in the world, appreciate it more, then, to quote the situationist, we'd find our authentic desires. And whether you want to call that some sort of, Marxist utopia, or just sort of, being happier in yourself and happy to go for a walk instead of buying stuff, is that something that you recognise from your research, and or have I got it completely wrong? I mean, is walking inherently just a way to be much more in the world and to be happier in yourself?
Yes, Simon, I'd say you hit the nail on the head. I think I see those themes repeated again and again and by people who are writing and researching on the topic of walking as artistic practice. I'd say these are central pillars. The idea of anti-capitalist approaches, the idea of enhanced presence. I'd say, yeah, just your summary was great. And I'd say those threads come through the book quite a bit because I'm a bit biased in that way myself. I love the situationist work. And so, yeah, I think that those are really important topics for what it is to live in late capitalism right now.
I mean,
Phew,
what's
that's a
key
relief.
here? Yeah, I mean, Simon, what's key here is you don't have a copy of the book in your hand. I do. And what I can tell you is that on the back, it's got a category and it says art slash self-help. Now, I'm not sure whether that's self self-help is exactly what you get through walking, or whether you need this book to make your way through life. But I have to tell you, it's a fabulous book because not only is it kind of, you know, an exploratory research, and I mean, what I didn't mention at the front of this event is that whenever you search on Google and you Google anything about walking art, then Ellen's blog comes up at least in the top 10 of the Google searches. She's either really good at doing the metadata or she actually has covered pretty much everything that's out there on walking art. And she's got this fantastic blog that she keeps coming up, and it's keeps popping up each time you go for a search. But what I have to say, Simon, is you've hit the nail on the head. This book is categorized as self-help. I think it's a cracking good thing. I think lots of people are involved in that kind of thing. How do you feel, Ellen, about it being in the self-help section?
Andrew, you like when I got my copy, this happened without my knowledge. I was counting on it being listed as art. And I think that speaking to that capitalist moment, I think my publisher decided this would market better if we threw it in the self-help as well. Not to say, to their credit, it could absolutely be beneficial. Like if you wanted to go down that route in chapter 10 about health benefits, there's information in there. Or if you want to tout the self-help of like just artistic exploration, absolutely. But I would say that that was absolutely thrown on there by marketing, by myself, which is kind of funny if you think about the larger context of just what Simon was getting at, which is.
Okay, well, what I just need to check in now, I've got someone who's put up a highlight, Quentin, who I know sometimes isn't Quentin, but it's someone who is with Quentin. But there's a highlight on your screen. I have no idea whether that means you were going to try and ask a question or not. And so has Anne. And as we know, Bob Parks has absolutely floored us with a question prior to the event, which I've put up in the chat. So who wants to go first? Anne's saying it was a mistake. Okay, so Quentin, would you like to go first? And that gives a chance then also for us all to have a quick look. And then Alexandra's got something in there as well. So let's go. Let's go with Quentin first.
My question is, what was the most surprising discovery you made whilst walking?
Well, while walking in general, or while writing the book?
Yeah, when you were, what was the most surprising realization? Or one of them, like an epiphany or something?
That's a really good question. I would say maybe I would relate to one of the works that I don't have pictured here, was a recent, sort of recent, within the last 5 years, work where I took some of these ideas about heightened observation, heightened listening, and I was on a water taxi, and we were talking about ability and disability. and how walking itself, it can be a barrier for folks for whom cannot walk. And so when I was traveling on this very slow water taxi and thinking in a really open-minded way about what is walking, and is it about a certain speed of moving through the world? Is it about a certain heightened attention while we move? These topics were coming up, and we were talking through them as part of this sort of socially engaged social practice piece. And so, Quentin, I'd say that was one of the ones that really has stayed with me as an inspiration, a realization, an idea or concept that I keep rolling around with and thinking about. So, yeah, that would be my most recent inspiration.
Brilliant.
Okay, so shall we? Anne said it was a mistake. So, but Alexandra, and then we'll come to you, Bob. Okay, I haven't forgotten you, Bob. You're in control. Alexandra, do you want to voice this, or do you want me to voice it?
I'll voice it. It's fine.
Brilliant.
I wrote it out because I wanted it to be coherent. That helps me do that. So just to read what I just wrote. So the previous questions, the first one highlighted, how different this approach is to the other books on walking art. I've read some various books on the history of walking art or walking, etc. And clearly that sort of seems like it came naturally out of your course, right? But at the same time, at some point, that must have been a very conscious decision, right, to differentiate yourself that way. And so I was wondering if you could talk a bit more theoretically, right, about that and why you chose to do that and why you think that's important.
Yeah, it's a great question, Alexandra. All of my writing, I've written a couple of different textbooks. All of them are driven very, very much by the practical and by the needs of myself as a teacher. And when I'm out there looking for tools to support my teaching and things that are really accessible to a wide range of people, when I can't find the tool that I'm looking for, this is what results. Like this book and my other books are like, gosh, that thing that I need doesn't seem to exist in the world. And so if I feel passionately about it, or passionately enough, that's where my books come out, or is when I feel like this is something that it resonates enough with myself to drive through the entire process of writing a book, because it's arduous, and that I feel like somebody else other than my weird self could find value out of this. And so that is where it comes from. And in terms of the structure and how it differs from others, I think that I recognize and love the really highly structured books that exist. I'm a really structured person myself. And at the same time, I have a long history of studying things like performance, things like Fluxus and the Situationists, and all these folks who really can ideate in a much more rhizomatic way. And so that type of approach was definitely appealing to me as I mapped out how this book might exist, like what might the taxonomy be. So I hope that helps.
Okay, so Bob, has you wrote this question before the event took place. Has do you want to modify the question you're about to ask, or is this still the question?
It's still the question. It's still the question. It's still the question, but I want to introduce it a little bit in relation to the thing. Now, it's a personal one, from my own personal experience as a performance artist, and my idea that performance art is what 50 years on is what walking art now is. So there's a sort of development only walking art as performance art in movement. So this is the question, and it's to do with the underpinning process rather than a description of what happens. So this is the question. If I can see it, read it. Process became psychosis for me for 30 years until I accidentally killed my mother in a car crash and she took it with her. This is fully explained in Whitehead's Magnus Opum, Process and Reality in 1929. But I cannot understand a lot of his use of terminology in the same sort of way I can't work too well with computers, funnily enough. Sufficient to say it to extract sufficiently to try to extract his precise meaning from it. The world of computers and mobile phones is now what this is, and what this has become. Unknowingly, it seems the world is lulled by its feeling and has renounced consciousness. Celebrating walking as an artistic practice, while we are nudged into renouncing consciousness, can I suggest to you what Malevich did with his black square by calling for us just a moment to consider the implications of what is being bought into? So it's a sort of an underpinning question.
Yes, I was going to say that sounds like thank you for your reflection. That I don't know what the the thrust of how I should respond to that, but you're touching on a lot of things that I regularly trace to the history of walking as artistic practice. I see the history of performance art as very aligned with what's led us to where we are today in walking as artistic practice. Yeah, let me know if there's anything specific that I can.
What I want you to focus on is this: what's happening with technology, walking art as a separate practice, and your reflections on, let's see, walking art as activism to present an alternative. There's this book by Technofuturism by the Greek politician. It sort of suggests a methodology, a way to approach it. I was just wondering, not in describing your practice, which is very interesting, but about what it's about. Why are you doing it? What is the motivation behind it? And very much in terms of consciousness. And because that's the level on which performance art is working on. And I see that's the level that performance art potentially can and hopefully will. So just, are there any ways in which you could moderate your practice or involve aspects of addressing, like, seeing people don't talk to each other anymore, they're on the phone, or all this kind of stuff that's going. There's a sea change in life happening right across the world, and performance art, but it's got to deal with the nitty gritty, what underpins it. So rather than do something like having people walk in lines and all that as a separate practice, is there some way of integrating it into actual meeting with people as a part of society itself? That's the sort of question. Any sort of reflections on that?
Yes, I mean, yeah, I would say technology pops up over and over throughout the book, and that I see it in the ways that many people use it with walking as artistic practice. I think I see what you're saying about gathering and bringing people together in a not technologically mediated way as well. That pops up in the book as well, because that idea of presence versus absence is a really central thrust to how do we document, how do we archive, how do we engage. Some folks throw it completely out the window. They don't want a bit of documentation, and that is the essence of their practice. There's so many different avenues that you can branch out there in, and I think for those folks for whom walking as artistic practice should not be documented in any way, form, because that sort of violates the spirit of the presence and the importance of being together and to experience collectively as a community together. For some, that to document is to violate in that way. And that's one totally valid point of view on that. But I think where some of that impulse comes from is a bit of resistance against technology, against the idea of the isolated nature of contemporary experience. Loneliness is one of the top health concerns in the world as we continue to develop technology. So those are some of my first responses, the topics and ideas that come to my head when I hear you talk about that.
Okay,
Could
now,
I push it a little further? Okay. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll come back to it, Bob. But how about that? But a couple of questions which are sort of together. Tamsin and Michael have sort of mentioned something about writing the course, delivering the course, and what was the kind of student reaction. But first, let's go to Kate, and because are you a drawer yourself, Kate? You talk about drawing and performance.
Yes, yeah, I am. And I mean, this is a little bit, it's new to me, and I'm not quite sure I've followed the last question. Yeah, I just wondered whether you think, and I think Bob sort of does think this, that drawing and walking always has a performative aspect to it, or whether it can be kind of a private practice. Because I mean, just for context, I live in the middle of nowhere in Snowdonia in Wales, and I can see what you're doing in terms of the community work and bringing people together and that kind of thing. But that is my experience of walking is generally it's me and possibly my husband and the dog. And I just wondered about your thoughts on the kind of intersection of that performative and community aspect with drawing and walking.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, Kate, it gets down to some of the fundamental arguments about performance. And what is performance, the necessity or lack of audience, and I think that's sort of like at the crux of what you're driving at too. Is an audience necessary for something to be performative? And I don't think there are right or wrong answers here. I do know there are people who feel very passionately about this topic and will argue to the death on one side or the other. For me, as an artist myself, I would say that for me, the presence of an audience is necessary for me to categorize my drawing as performative or my walking as performative. But I am not always aiming to be performative in either of those practices. I too have lived in a lot of very isolated or rural areas. Currently I'm in a city, but I've had those past experiences, and drawing and walking for me have incredible power as individual private practices as well. I really do think of them as media, and that I opt in and out of them. I use them as they are useful to me, and I use them in different ways, in different contexts, to do different things. So I'm very much not an essentialist. I don't think there are right and wrong or performative or non-performative ways to engage with these things. I think that we're pretty empowered to make those decisions ourselves, based on what our interests are and what we're driving at. What do we want to do with these things? What are the topics we're interested in? And then how do we use walking or how do we use drawing to those purposes?
Thank you, Ellen.
Yeah.
Has anyone else like to chip in anything about walking, drawing, performance? I'm not a drawer, so I can't speak. But is there anyone out there who feels that they want to put their 2 pence in? Or we'll just go to another question. I mean, as I say, there are some good stuff going on here with Tamsin and Michael. They're obviously tuning in several hundred or 1,000 miles apart. I don't know where Michael, I don't know where you are, but Tamsin, it can be found in Edinburgh, but I don't know where you can be found. But Tamsin, do you want to go first with your question? No.
Yes, hi. Yes, no, I do. I'm just being slow. finding the right buttons to press. Hi. Yes, it's really fascinating, and I'm loving to hear about your book. Thank you, Ellen. I was interested in what I find with my walks and with my work is that I have this sort of rather intense process when I'm preparing and when I'm, doing the recce perhaps and that sort of thing, and then it comes out into the community, and the whole thing becomes something else when other people are involved. Obviously, I mean, we all know that. So I was just wondering, really, how much of a part did your students play in feedbacking, in ideas, in how much of that you included in the book? Like, how did you sort of mediate that, that sort of your ideas and your aims and your own process, and with the community process and the student process?
Yes, it's such a good question and such an essential one. As a writer, it was absolutely reflective on the feedback that I got from the students in process. I was very much had my notebook with me at all times, because I would approach the class with this like nicely prepared lesson plan. We were going to go through this type of presentation. We're going to go outside for a bit. We're going to come back. We're going to gather big group, large group discussions, small group discussions, one-on-one, blah, 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 blah. And then inevitably, just as you said, once it all starts to flow and there's engagement, we might completely veer off path and do a wholly different topic if that's where everybody's interest takes us or where the conversation flows. And I often found like, oh gosh, I missed this. Like there was a
Have we lost sound? Ellen, we've just lost sound from you. Yeah, we can't hear your sound. You've suddenly gone. Sound has gone. Ellen has been silenced.
I think if somebody else has got their sound on and talks, then perhaps it
yeah,
overlaps.
maybe that. Okay. Ellen, have another go.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, that must have been what it was. I saw a little note pop up that said reconnecting to audio. But to Tamsin's question, yes, the students absolutely influenced it. I took copious notes on how I could improve the approach to each of these topics. I radically changed exercises based on how they actually engaged on them versus my imagined engagement with them. And so that was invaluable to have them and to have a responsive, collaborative experience with them. Definitely made the end product much, much better, in my opinion.
Oh, that's brilliant. So you were very flexible, and were you conscious then when you were writing up, oh, I remember so and so saying that, or I remember that coming out of did you just allow that to be part of your process, or did you sort of carefully quote people? Or
I would say I quoted people when it was wholly their idea and their alteration of it. But so often it was a group activity, like where that together we brought it together. So the way that I credit that, because crediting is so important to me, and making sure that the historical narrative is traceable for folks. In the acknowledgments area at the start of the book, similar to this presentation today, I explain the different workshops and how it all led together. So, because I want all of those wonderful folks to get credit.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, Michael, are you happy to air your question?
Yes, and in fact, it follows quite naturally, I think, on Tamsin's good question, which is just, I'm curious about any specific examples of that kind of intersection between your plan and your students' responses that were memorable, given all of the aspects of movement that you cover in the book, which are brilliant. There were so many that kind of caught my interest, but I was curious what if there were specific exercises or specific ideas or plans, lesson plans, or things that really captured your students' imagination, maybe in a surprising way, and were memorable for that reason.
Yes, that is such a good question. And I would say the one that sticks with me and strikes me still very strongly, and actually led to a whole subsection in the book, was the issue of consent. And I brought up the topic of Vito Acconci's Following piece. And I was excited to talk about this artwork. And I thought, this is going to be great. What a work to highlight the idea of chance encounter, unpredictability. And I was thrilled about it. And one of my students was so resistant. And she was just like, this is wrong. This is not correct. This shouldn't be highlighted. This shouldn't be celebrated by the art world. And I just had to ask her later, like, what was this? what's happening? Are you okay? Like, is this all right? Turns out she had a really, really terrible experience with a stalker. And this was incredibly triggering for her. And it altered how I taught this material going forward. It brought me to add the analysis of consent in the book as well. And it never would have, I would not have, on my own, have had this realization, had connected the dots, because it wasn't part of my personal lived experience. And in that way, I'm really, really grateful. And I should say this was from a walking project I did in a class previous to these 3 workshops, but it really speaks to your point, Michael, about like what's something that I couldn't have arrived at on my own without the help of my students.
Oh, just a quick one. Simon asked, what was the name of the controversial artwork?
Oh, Vito Conchi's following piece. And then similarly, I can look it up in the book. There, I cite like, there's a piece by Yoko Ono. There's a piece by, oh, I'm blanking on her name, Sophie Kao. There are pieces, there's many pieces that engage following without consent. And so those, I sort of analyze a handful of those in the book and point that out, just so it's a really important topic. And it's one that I had not looked at thoroughly enough myself, and so it felt really important to bring that to the surface.
Well, actually, Simon, it's you who've come up with this thing, which is something that, because I know Simon runs sort of guided tours and things, slightly alternative, I'd say, from Simon, perhaps more of the straight-laced sort of guy. But I've often got people to do things as a sort of kind of collaborative thing, like a sort of group participation on a kind of guided walk where I get them to dress all in blue. You know, I give them money off. I sell them a tour, a kind of walk, and I say, you get $2 if you turn up in blue, and they all turn up in blue because they're all desperate to get their money back, and then they don't realize that because I've got them all dressed in blue, I can then, in a Machiavellian way, manipulate them because they see themselves as part of a team, and therefore they in a way they relinquish their individualness. They become a group, and then you can like a shepherd, you can use the flock, and I think this is kind of what Simon is picking on. But Simon, over to you.
Well, I'm seeing you in a very different light now, aren't I? Anyway, master manipulator. So could you say something, please, about the increasingly popular idea of co-creation and the idea that everyone is an artist / producer / creator versus the old idea of an artist who broadcasts at an essentially passive audience which acts as a receptacle rather than a co-conspirator?
It's a really good question, and it gets to some larger questions about what is art, and ideas like that. So I would say, to answer the first part of your question about co-creation and everyone is an artist or producer, I'm pretty open, I'm pretty laid back when it comes to designating somebody as a producer or an artist. My only caveat, and I speak only for myself here, is intention. And so I do think intention is important. And so that would be my one response there to co-creation or artist producer. The idea of the artist who broadcasts at a passive audience, I think that is still one way of making, but I do see it as one of many, and I think that we as artists have a responsibility to consciously opt in or out of various ways of making. That might be appropriate for some folks in what they're driving at, what their concept is, whatever it is they're working towards. And I will say I move pretty fluidly back and forth between both. I see value in both approaches, and it all depends on just what am I aiming for. So I think that would be my response, Simon.
Well, I'm very tempted. I'm very tempted to keep Anne de Forest's question as the last question we pose, but in a minute I'll give her a chance to voice it. But I would say that we're right on the hour, so we usually run on for about another 30 minutes or so, and so there's plenty of time. But I'm fully aware that Molly, Christina, Clara, Barbara, and there are probably a few other people, Carol, a few other people out there who are just soaking it all in. But I'm absolutely certain that if they have at any time claimed to be a walking artist, they should have something to say to this presenter. So, don't hold back. Let's get some questions going from everybody, or some opinions or reflections. And Molly says she doesn't have to go to work today. So that's really good. But Anne, over to you. You want poor Ellen, you want Ellen to sum up a walking artist in 5 words, is that right?
Yeah, kind of a joke in a way, but it's just so striking. I mean, of course, this is something we all wrestle with, but I was just, I'm so impressed with and excited about this book because of what you said about structure and how beautifully structured it is. And it's almost like just by presenting it, even before I get it, I get like, oh, wow, this has so much clarity, and all the connections all make sense, and it's beautifully lucid. And at the same time, as I was listening, I was just struck, and this is one of the things, entering this world somewhat late in my own life as a writer, and now becoming a writer, walking artist, is how somebody wrote about rhizomes, how it just, one thing connects to another, to another, to another, and there's this wonderful expansiveness, and boundaries keep getting pushed, crossed, blurred, and that's all really exciting. And in terms of, back to the last question, even between boundaries between who's an artist and who isn't an artist. But at the same time, there are people who want to know, well, what is walking art? Sort of like the elevator pitch question. So I'm just really curious what you say when people probably all the time ask you that question. Do you have a pithy answer?
Oh, I wish I did, Anne. I don't have a pithy answer. Typically, I start with the baseline of, well, it's any artwork or art practice that engages walking in some way. And I leave it at that because it can, just as you said, it can go in so many directions. And it really, there are so many heated, arguments about, is it art? Is it not art? Is it what constitute, when have you crossed some sort of threshold to become a walking artist? And I say to those folks, go for it. Have those arguments. Go indulge. I'm going to be over here asking the question, is it interesting? To me, that question is so much more compelling to myself, my practice, my interests, and so forth, rather than does it fit in the box or does it not fit in a box that we call walking art. And so I know that's such an unsatisfying answer for some folks, but I've had it come up again and again in so many different venues and so many different contexts, that is it art question, and in this case, is it walking art, that I kind of have come to the result of, it might be, but I'd rather talk about these concepts that go with it than dwell on the is it or isn't it kind of thing.
That's great. That's really helpful. I think, because I don't know, there was this one thing as you were talking, I was thinking, well, it's maybe in a way that's the point, that it doesn't have a box. That it's always going to be outside a box and defy the box. And that's a pretty exciting art form to have that. And
Absolutely.
That there's this way that it goes out, but it also comes down to this thing that everybody can relate to, because, the disability issue, that's a big question aside, but there's a way that we are all fundamentally walkers, or that we're, so it's really exciting. But yeah, I just was curious. I think that's a good answer. practice that engages walking in some way.
Some
And
way.
let that be right. It's
Absolutely.
cute.
Well, I have to say that I really didn't know much about walking art, and probably don't know very much now, because having how I should re-say that is that having read Ellen's book, I discovered so much I'd never thought of, and pieces and practices that I hadn't encountered, and yet I guess I pride myself that I've been, at this sort of game, this practice, not necessarily of making walking art myself, but interviewing walking artists and finding out about walking art through meeting people and working with them. And yet Ellen, in her book reveals so many more people and ideas that I hadn't actually thought about. So all of you have got something to look forward to. But what I was going to say was one of the things, and one of the very first walking artists I met was Barbara Launder. So Barbara, you have a question, but Barbara and I first met in 2007 at the Banff Centre of Art. It wasn't a walking art residency, it was a walking and art residency. Was it not, Barbara?
It was.
It was.
It was.
But anyway, what's your question, Barbara? Fire away.
Well, two things. First of all, thank you for the great presentation, Ellen, and I'm really looking forward to getting a copy of the softcover book when it's out. Just one little comment, I guess, before my question. I was on Facebook this morning and saw a thread from Rebecca Solnit, who was recounting a very unpleasant experience she just had after a presentation she gave in Vancouver recently, where she left the venue and was going to connect with friends in a bar or something. And someone who had been at the presentation came up to her in this, dark sidewalk area and said, well, I'll walk with you to the next place you're going. And Rebecca Solnit felt completely unsafe and kind of just in a very disrespected kind of space through that experience. So here's someone who, wrote something that's almost like a Bible for walking and thinks and talks about walking so much, and still she was very discombobulated by this experience. And to me, it really drew attention to this question of public and private space. And as walking artists, we're often working in public spaces, and we might be working with a group. It might be collaborators or co-creators or students. And so there are participants. So there's the artists, maybe participants, but then there might be onlookers. There might be a public that's kind of in a circle around that other group. And there's some kind of division or boundary there, I think. And I was thinking about your background in theater, which I didn't know about till today. And I was wondering if you and or your students ever think about that group of onlookers as being like an audience, or, what role do they have? And does it ever come into the development of the work? Are there things about the public reception of the work that changes what students or what you are doing in the walking art? That's my
really good question. That's a really good one, Barbara. And it brings forward, just like you said there, it's almost like layers of an onion in terms of engagement, and to, I can't remember who was asking earlier, but I think Kate was asking about the individual experience. And then, who is the work for? Is it for the artist? Is it, if it's a group walk, is it for the artist and the group? Is it, if it's in public, in an urban space or a place where you're going to encounter non-walkers with this group walk, there's a third layer, and I would even add, there's a fourth layer. If you're documenting in any way and you then bring this into an exhibition space or a public space for consideration after the fact, there's a fourth layer of people who might engage with the work. And I think that it's our responsibility as artists to be considered as we do that, to be mindful of what is the trajectory of this piece? Is it truly ephemeral? It begins when we start and engage as a group, and then it ends the moment that we disperse? Is it to be presented again in the future? If it is going to be presented again, or even if it's not, what do those onlookers, how do they relate to us? They matter. We're there. We're in their space, you know? And to that point, I think about this a lot, and that's why I have a section in the book that's about group walking. And it has a lot of recommendations from a lot of different sources on group walking and what might you consider, what has been considered best practices and
well, we've lost your audio again.
to think about.
We just lost the audio there just for a little bit.
Okay, but I'm back now. You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. Well, where I was going, I was kind of going on a tangent there, was that it's important to consider. It's important to think about all of the possible audiences as you're creating as a walking artist. And there isn't a set way of engaging them, but I do think the most important part is that you're consciously engaging. You don't just show up and see what happens, because you do have a responsibility to others. We live in community, you know.
Thanks. I just want to say also, I know you want to do an interview with me, and that's the next thing on my list. So you'll be getting some things from me soon.
Thanks so much, Barbara. And for everybody else at the talk, I feature a couple of Barbara's works in the book, and they're in a couple different chapters. And so another wonderful highlight that I felt honored to be able to make.
You got in the book, Barbara. You lucky person. Okay, so Christina's got a question to ask, but I just want to get back to this thing about the public, private, and onlookers and stuff like that, because I did a walk. It's a few years ago now, and I'm kind of thinking about whether I should reprise it or not, in a sort of kind of different way. But it was what we did was we did a walk at twilight. And the reason why I chose twilight was that you could look into people's houses and offices and places of work, because they hadn't drawn their curtains. Now, so someone said to me I should have called it a Peeping Tom tour, really, because it was kind of, that was what it was, and it was that kind of thing. It was kind of weird sort of thing to do. And what I was getting people to do was not really study what was going on inside these houses, but what I wanted them to do was to actually create a story out of the characters that they saw in the houses and in the offices and in the shops. And it was kind of interesting because I wrote it up and blah, kind of documented it. Not a single person ever got to me, came back to me and said, hey, you should not have been doing that. That was, that was invasive of people's privacy. And another time we did a walk through some of the streets in Bloomsbury in London, in central London, which, by the way, is the most surveilled area of anywhere in the world. There were approximately 100 well, at the time, there were 100 government or local authority cameras, per square, I know. There are lots of them, okay? But now, of course, private people have loads of cameras, not just businesses, but also individuals with their front doorbell. I mean, I walk down the street and my street in my home street here, we're a street of terraced houses, 113 houses in the street, and 62 of them have a doorbell which has a video on it. And you get this kind of weird thing where actually you're being watched. Everywhere you go, you're being watched. So what's wrong with me watching you? So it's a kind of interesting thing. And that's what I find. Simon's got a bit of a wry smile on his face, because this is what I kind of find is when we're doing group walks in London, because it's a very populous place, you can't avoid onlookers and you can't avoid having that kind of confrontation almost. And sometimes you actually provoke that confrontation because that actually ignites the co-creation, collaboration, sparks things off, that kind of thing. Anyway, that aside, Christina, you've got a question. get out of that hole that I was digging myself.
Hi, everyone. So, first of all, thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Andrew. Without undermining any of the previous talks, I think this is one of the best one, or at least one which has really resonated with me. And my question is, so at the beginning of your presentation, you hinted a bit at your own personal experience. You hinted very briefly at your personal experience of walking as a woman, especially walking alone in the dark. So I was wondering if that features in a book and how, and whether this theme has been a theme that was discussed or worked upon with your students.
Yes, it absolutely did. In that I mentioned it both in the section on who gets to walk and where. There's a subsection on gender and what that's like to consider walking at night and walking in other places where folks of different genders might not feel safe walking. And then it also figures into the history as well. There's quite a bit of writing about and somebody in the chat mentioned Flanneuse by Laura Elkin. And so thinking about where and when do women and folks of other genders feel safe or not safe? And when does that conversation even come into play? When does it even start to become a concern? Like, when does it enter consciousness that, oh, some folks don't feel safe? And it's actually only very recently that has become a topic that one might discuss publicly. So I try to highlight that in the first chapter on history, and then later when we're talking about who gets to walk and where. And then also it pops up periodically throughout the book, I would say, just because it is my lived experience. And I try to highlight that as well in the introduction of the book is, by the way, I am a white cis woman talking about my lived experience as well as these other researched experiences, just to foreground for folks who maybe don't think about those things, that this affects everybody who might want to engage with this way of working. So yeah, it's a great question, Christina, and thanks for asking it, because it definitely affected the overall approach to the book.
Do you have any particular exercise or workshop that you do about this with your students?
Yes, I was going to say, let me look. I've got the book here so I could cheat on questions exactly like this, because it would be really easy for me to read one of them. Hold on. Let me find the page on which gender is. And even the first one that I talk about, safety, it'll take me just a second. I start out by inviting everybody to reflect on it, so what is your experience with your particular identity? Because for some it's going to be about the gender experience, but for others it'll be a highly racialized experience, or it will be deeply affected by disability, because some areas are accessible and some are not at all. Okay, so here's one. I was going to say this one is not necessarily about gender, but to the previous question about camera awareness. An exercise, just briefly, is to invite folks to take a walk around the block and identify the placement of as many surveillance cameras as possible. Note their location on a map. Do you notice any areas you can walk without being surveilled? And that is a walk inspired by sharedwalks.com. I'm flipping through. I'm almost to the gender section. This to be fair, the who gets to walk and where, I think, is the longest chapter in the book in terms of finding this stuff. Let me see here. I've got the exercise on observing. Oh, here we go. Considering gender. Reflecting on the gender-related walking examples mentioned above, develop a walking score that takes into consideration gender. Start by narrowing your focus. Are you going to home in on safety, the male gaze, societal traditions, attire, language, or something else? How will you craft this walk to emphasize gender? Who will walk? What will they do? Where and when will they do it? Be ready to explain why you created this score and made the choices that you did. So it's pretty wide open, but it leaves a lot of room for personal experience to come into play. And it invites people of all gender identities to engage with the question. And I've had responses to that exercise where some say, I am going to not walk. And that is part of my response to this exercise. And they will explain their choices and why. But it does seem to be a fruitful exercise that gets a lot of folks thinking critically about gendered experience in public space.
Okay, so Bob's got a sort of follow-up question, but before he dives into that, I just want to make sure that Molly, who doesn't have to go to work, Clara, who does many a walk and is very much involved in all sorts of onlookers and participatory work, whether either of you have a question you want to raise, and if there's anyone else that I've overlooked who switched off their video so I can't see you, but I think it's just you two. You don't have to ask a question, but I just don't want you to go away from this event and think, well, he didn't give us a chance to say what we wanted to say. So Carol, you've not said anything either. So Carol, Molly, Clara, do you want to say anything, or are we going to let Bob take over the show again? Clara, do you want to say something? No. Okay, Clara's happy. Molly or Carol, are you both happy where you are? You're happy just gently listening in?
I don't have a specific question, but thank you, Ellen. It was fabulous. I'm really looking forward to the soft cover and to meeting you in person. And we'll get you out for a book tour. Anne and I will have to get you to the Philadelphia, Delaware, Wilmington region. So
I love that plan.
I'll just no, I don't have a specific question. I just am anxious to get hold of this book because it sounds fabulous. And I did want to know, did you get my book?
I did, Molly. I have it on my bookshelf. Yes. I took a picture of it. I put it in my Instagram stories, and I'm so grateful. Thank you.
No,
so much.
the only reason I asked was not out of narcissism, but because Australia Post gets hacked regularly, so I get fishes and mishes and whatever they are. So as soon as I send something, I get text messages saying it didn't come. So I just always wonder, did it arrive? So
It arrived. Oh my gosh, I feel lucky. Okay.
Yeah, good. Okay, thanks. And thanks for the presentation. This is great.
Okay, Anne's just nipped in with a reflection. So before Bob gives, we're giving Bob the last shout. So Anne, do you want to voice your reflection that you've just written?
Sure. this was just coming up as you were talking about the whole idea of security and risk and walking. And it's just one of the beauties of group walking. And I've been involved in these urban perimeter walks that become bigger and bigger, is that you end up, they seem to increase in diversity. And the more people you have, the more you are able to experience the terrain, the world, the environment through their bodies as well. And I'm just very struck by how, I'm sure you've been struck by this too, how the group becomes its kind of own organism in navigating risk and sort of adjusting to like whose discomfort do we have to deal with, whose bravado do we have to deal with, where's the in between, or whose pace do we adjust to. And so that's its own thing. Carol and Molly and I just did a walk together in Philadelphia, and just the three of us had that organic thing of who's, it's like you become an animal of something else. You're more than yourself, and you listen to each other, and somebody's sometimes more intrepid and curious, and it's just something that I wanted to bring out because it came out of this discussion of feeling, who feels safe, who doesn't. And I'm sure you have exercises in there that address that.
Yes. And I'd say you're lucky when the group listens to each other. I think that when you have that responsiveness amongst the participants, that's such a sweet spot. That's such a great moment. Because just as you said, pacing can be one of the most basic ways that a group struggles with this, but also that idea of safety. I'll just say walking in Minneapolis can be very fraught for people of color here. It is a city with a known problematic police force that singles out and discriminates against people of color. And so having those discussions before you walk so that as a group you can mindfully walk together are so important. So, yeah.
Okay, everybody, thanks so much for your contributions. We're just going to give Bob the chance to say something, which is I'm not sure it's a follow-up reflection on another tough question you're going to throw at us, Bob.
It's another tough question.
Anyway, okay, a really tough question. Go for it. Go for the tough question.
You're describing walking art within the art tradition of the West, but Malevich's Black Square was more radical than that. And his statement announced the end of art as a label. And what he wanted people to do at this point was to to reflect on what is replacing it. That's just similarly, I see walking art as laying outside of art. This is a non-artistic approach to art, if you like, with no preconceived ideas. So as a non-artist, not under the safety net of the label of art, how do you see your practice as a human being, as a walking artist, rather than an artist in relation to this is the point, the loss of consciousness for humanity, which is being replaced by cyberspace, and the activism of walking art of taking people away from that preoccupation, waking them up out of the dream they're in, trance.
I would say I feel like an artist. I don't know if I would characterize myself as a non-artist, but I think the thrust of what you're getting at is taking people away from screens and technology through the act of walking art. Yes, sometimes that is the thrust of what I'm trying to get at with my project or my walking practice at a given time. So yes, that sounds familiar to me. The idea of sort of trying to claw back some of our presence, not living distracted by screens and other things. And at other times, I'm using my walking practice to address other ideas, other concepts beyond technology.
Okay, here we go then. We're going to kind of wrap it up. What I'm going to sort of say, I'm going to let Ellen have the last word. I'm not sure whether, this audience has been most sympathetic because there's a large number of walking artists amongst the group, or whether we've actually been most critical. Toughest audience that Ellen has had to pitch to, vice versa. Anyway, we all have to wait till April. Well, I don't because I've got a copy of the book, but everyone else has to wait till April to get a softback version. I tell you, it is worth waiting for. I have read the book, but I haven't actually done any of the exercises or instructions. That's because I'm not really a sort of person who reaches for the self-help book, he says. No. We'll give it a go. What we're going to say is a big thank you, Ellen. Really fantastic. Well done. You did really well. You actually, talked about a book that none of us can actually buy yet. And therefore a tough one, a big pitch you had to do. But thank you very much. It was entertaining, widespread, interesting. A few new ideas came up. Some really good questions it provoked. Some good discussion. But a big thank you to everybody. See you again very soon. Ellen, the last word.
Yeah, I think my last word is just gratitude. Thank you all so much for showing up and listening and asking really fantastic questions. I love wrestling with all these ideas. I think it's super fun. And if you are interested in that soft cover, I dropped a link in the chat. Trust me, I'm not going to use this to spam the heck out of everybody. It's truly just an email I'm going to send in April to give everybody a link if you want to buy the soft cover. It'll be like a little reminder. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up, and I'll give you a little nudge in April when the soft cover is available. So that's it. Yeah.
That's it. Okay. Bye, folks. That's all.
Thank you. Bye.